So you guys enjoyed the last 4 times I gave Kamen Riders Pokemon typings. So with that in mind, I figured there was no better time but to wrap up the Reiwa era, for now, with the first ever Reiwa Kamen Rider, Kamen Rider 01. And much like the Saber Riders, these ones are actually sorta simple to give typings to. Mostly because the Progrise keys which the riders use to transform are based off of animals and sometimes literally have an elemental ability in the name. So with that out of the way, let's get straight into it with our main rider being Kamen Rider 01. Now 01's base form is called Rising Hopper, which I believe this one's the easiest to give a typing to. Of course being Bug. It's literally a grasshopper, do I need to say much? But of course 01 has a bunch of other forms including Biting Shark, which is a pure water type. I mean, it's legit based off of a shark and it specializes in water-based environments. But moving on, we have Flying Falcon, which is of course a pure flying type. And again, it's a falcon, falcons fly. But up next, we have another firefighting type being Flaming Tiger. And the reason for the fire typing is because it can release flames from its hands. Now the reason for the fighting type is because it has a higher punching power compared to the other forms. Now moving on, we have a similar form being Freezing Bear, and I decided to give it the Ice Fighting type. This is because it uses ice-based attacks, and it's a polar bear, and it's basically just like Flaming Tiger. But moving on, we have our mecha form being Breaking Mammoth, which is Steel Rock. And I mean, this thing is legit a big giant honkin' robot with a jet form and all of that. So Steel type just made sense. Now the reason for the rock type is because mammoths are actually extinct, dating all the way back to the Ice Age. But moving on, we have our first super form being Shining Hopper, which is Bug Fairy. And I decided to give it the Swarm ability since it is a stronger hopper. And I think that pretty much explains the bug typing. But as for the fairy typing, it actually comes from the Henshin announcement. When I shine, darkness fades. Which, by the way, that just goes hard. Like, it had no excuse going that hard. So with that Henshin announcement, I decided to give it the fairy type since most fairy types have light-based attacks. But moving on, we have Shining Assault Hopper, which is Bug Fighting. And this is literally just Shining Hopper, but it also combines the Assault Wolf Progrise key, giving him more punching and kicking power than a regular Shining Hopper. But moving on, we have our Berserk form being MetalCluster, which is obviously a Steel type. But I decided to give it the Dark Terra type since it is a Berserk form. And I mean, this form is literally made out of steel with some nanobot type things. But more so, the Progrise key is actually created by Guy, a man who literally has a metallic suit and loves metallic things. I mean, the guy literally has a robot dog. But moving on, we have our final form being 02. And I decided to give it the Bug Psychic type. Now, the bug typing, I think it's pretty much self-explanatory. But as for the Psychic type, it comes from the Foresight ability. Within this suit, Aruto can look into multiple different ways to win a fight or just situations in general. But moving on, we have our extra final form being Realizing Hopper, which is of course a pure bug type. But I did decide to give it the Simple ability since it does have an increase in stats. Which, if you don't know, the Simple ability doubles all the stats of a Pokemon. So it really fits this form. But moving on, we have our Winter movie form being ZeroZero-One, which is Bug Dark. And in this form, Aruto is using a Force Riser, which can only be used by Humagears. So every time he uses the driver, he takes damage himself. Thus, I decided to give it the Dark typing since it does affect the user. But moving on, we have our Hyper Battle form, which is Hopping Kangaroo, which of course is pure fighting. And I don't know if you know this, but kangaroos will beat the shit out of you if you fuck with them. Like, if you breathe the wrong direction, they're gonna fuck you up. But moving on, we have another movie form being Hell Rising Hopper, which is Dark Fire, but I also decided to give it the Bug Terra since it is a Hopper. And the reason for the Dark typing is because it's literally a Berserk form. And the reason for the Fire typing is because it's named Hell Rising Hopper. So fire just fit here. But now we can finally head into our secondary rider being Kamen Rider Vulcan. Now Fuwa's base form is called Shooting Wolf, and I decided to give it the Steel Fighting type. Now Fuwa is just all armored up in this form, and he's also a punchy boy. I mean, he legit punches a bullet for his Henshin. Do I need to say much? But moving on, we have Punching Kong, which is pure fighting type. Now this form gives Fuwa a massive boost in his punching power, and he rarely uses his gun in this form. But moving on, we have Assault Wolf, which is steel fighting, and I decided to give it the Psychic Terra because of Naki. And this is basically just a bulkier shooting wolf. But the form can only be accessed due to Naki's AI chip inside of him. Moving on, we have Rampaging Vulcan, which is pure fighting type, but I decided to give it the Stellar Terror type. Now in this form, Fuwa gets all 10 Progrise keys incorporated into his armor. And I mean, as for the fighting type, he's a punching boy. But moving on, we have his final form being Orthoros Vulcan, which is of course steel fighting, but I decided to give it the Dark Terra type. Now the steel typing is due to him being more armored in this form. And as for the fighting type, it's because he has Wolverine claws, and if you know Wolverine, he's a fighter. Now the Dark Terra is due to his form using a Zetsumetsu Rise key, which forces the transformation, which eventually just destroys the Shot Riser. Now as for his V-Cinema form being Lone Wolf, I decided to go with a pure fighting type, but give him a Dark Terra type. And again, Fuwa's just a punchy boy. I don't really have much defense for the fighting type besides that. But in this form, he uses the Zero-One driver. But just like Orthoros Vulcan, this is a Force Rise, thus the Dark Terra type. But moving on, we have Kamen Rider Valkyrie with Rushing Cheetah, which is fighting normal. And I mean, it's a cheetah and it uses more kicking and punching attacks compared to other forms. But as for Lightning Hornet, I decided to give the Electric Bug type. And I mean, this is legit an Electric Hornet. Now in this form, she's able to shoot micro missiles that hit like a Hornet. And then she can also create a stinger that can neutralize opponents. Plus in this form, she is way faster than Cheetah. But moving on, we have Fighting Jackal, which is of course fighting dark. Now as for the dark typing, it's because she's under the control of ZAIA, who was the villain at the time. But as for the fighting type, it's mostly due to her close range fighting style. Moving on, we have our V-Cinema form and her final form being Justice Serval, which is of course steel fighting, but I decided to give it the Dark Terra. And this form is actually a mirror to Orthoros Vulcan, but instead of becoming a Wolverine, Yoa becomes a saber-toothed tiger. And just like Vulcan, this is a Force Rise transformation, making it unstable. But moving on to MetsubouJinrai, we have Kamen Rider Jin, which his base form is Flying Falcon, which is of course flying steel. And I mean, it's an armorized, falconized bird. Do I need to say more? But he does have a second form in Burning Falcon, which is of course fire flying. And again, it's a fire bird, and he uses more fire-based attacks. This dude is literally just moltres. But up next, we have Kamen Rider Horobi, who is based off of a scorpion, which of course makes him a poison type. And like I said, he's based off of a scorpion, and scorpions use mostly poison-based attacks. Look at Scorpy. But up next, we have Ark-Scorpin, which is of course dark poison. And this basically combines Ark, who is the main villain of the story, and Horobi's base typing to create dark poison. But moving on, we have Kamen Rider Ikazuchi, which is dark fighting. Now you might be asking, why not give him the flying type? Isn't a dodo a bird? And yes, it is a bird, but it's a flightless bird. So I decided to give him the fighting type since he's more of a brawler. And as for the dark type, he just gives off dark energy to me. And I mean, his final attacks are literally called Zetsumetsu Dystopia and Utopia. But moving on, we have Kamen Rider Naki, which is electric fighting. Now with this form, Naki can hack using electronic warfare, so that's where the electric type comes from. Now as for the fighting type, they use a bunch of punching attacks given that their kicking stat is so low. Plus they're using a Wolf Progrise key, which is also used by Vulcan. But moving on, we have Kamen Rider Thouser, which his base form is of course steel. Now most of Guy's suits are legit made out of metal, so I don't think there's really any discussion about that. But up next we have Thouser Gamer Illness, which is of course steel poison. Kinda ironic that a steel type got poisoned. But in this form, Guy has the Gamer Illness from Dan Kuroto, so it pretty much changes his whole suit to a jet black suit. And also he has a virus. But moving on, we have 1000 Ark, which is of course steel dark. And this is just Thouser using the Ark driver, and Ark is the main villain of the story. But speaking of Ark, we have Ark-Zero, which is dark psychic. And like I've said, Ark is the big bad of the series. But he can corrupt the user, forcing it to bid its will. Plus his finisher is literally called All Extinction. And just to further prove the psychic type, he can actually predict the future. But moving on, we have Ark-One, which is dark steel. And this is just Ark with much needed armor, nothing much to say. But up next, we have Kamen Rider 03, which is Psychic Bug. Now this form has Ark fusing with theirs, so it's more of a 02 upgrade. So that's where I got the Bug type from. But in this form, the two possess the ability to predict the future faster than Ark-Zero or even 02. But moving on, we have Kamen Rider Ichi-Gata, which is Bug Psychic. Now much like Zero-One, I decided to give it the Bug type since it's legit a grasshopper. Almost like it's a proto Zero-One. And as for the Psychic type, it's because he's modeled exactly like the original Riders and uses the Cyclone Riser. And not only that, he actually creates a Tornado Cyclone when transforming. But moving on, we have our movie Rider being Kamen Rider Eden, which is Dark Fairy. Now he is considered the big bad of the final movie. And also one of his finishers is literally called Hell Rise. Now as for the fairy type, it's due to his regeneration ability, which if you know anything about Pokemon lore, that's actually what Xerneas can do for life with Pokemon. But up next we have Kamen Rider Abaddon, which is dark fighting. Now these guys are basically just military guys for Kamen Rider Eden, so that's where I got the fighting type. But Abaddon also translates to a place of destruction or hell. But up next we have Kamen Rider Lucifer, which is pure dark. And I mean, Lucifer is legit the devil. Now I would have done fire, but he has no fire-based attacks, so just dark type, or the evil typing. But moving on, we have Kamen Rider MetsubouJinrai, which is dark normal, but it also has the multi-type ability. Now the reason for that is because it combines all 4 of the MetsubouJinrai members into one uncontrollable entity, which also coincidentally makes them a dark type. Now as for the normal type, it actually changes with the multi-type ability. So if the user is using Horobi's attacks, it's going to be poison, fire for Zinn, and so on and so forth. But up next we have Kamen Rider ZAIA, which is dark steel, and this is just an evil Thouser with a jet black suit. Nothing really much to say. And since Outsiders is heavily connected to ZeroZero-One, I figure there's no better option but to cover it here. Now starting off we have Kamen Rider Zein, which is fairy fighting. And I also decided to give it the Stellar Terror type. And I'm not gonna lie, Zein was a little bit hard to do since he's mostly just a shredder. But to me, he almost gives off this godlike aura from him, almost majestic, so that's where I got the fairy type from. And as for the fighting type, it's due to him easily adapting to different fighting styles. And that's because he has an immense amount of rider cards, which also gives him the Stellar Terror type. Now I didn't want to make a whole nother Geats video, so Kamen Rider Zinn Gazar will be in this one. And I decided to give it the Psychic Steel type with the Stellar Terror type. And this driver acts just like the Zillion driver for Kamen Rider Gado Omega. And it basically acts like a final form for Zinn. And just like his base form, he has control over gravity, thus the Psychic type. And the Steel type is because my boy is all armored up. But with that, let me know if there's any typings you disagree with down in the comment section below. And let me know if there's any series you want to see me cover in the future. But while you're down there, go ahead and smash the like button down below, and don't forget to subscribe with notifications on. We have a bunch of content coming out, and I don't want you to miss it. But with that, I'm gonna get the heck out of here. I'm FalPlays, and I'm out. Peace.